The industry has to start, the expertise has to build around these projects.
Give me an Excel spreadsheet and a term sheet instead of a PowerPoint.
We need to start small, walk before you can run.
You know, there's no black magic in this. It's all engineering and commercial know-how.
And it's now my pleasure and privilege to introduce our next panel, titled The Missing Link, Accelerating North America's Midstream. And I'm delighted to welcome to the stage our esteemed panelists. We have our moderator, Matt Fernley, partner at RK Equity, Trent Mell, founder and CEO of Electra Battery Materials, Dr. Rene LeBlanc, Vice President Commercial and Product Strategy at Lithium Americas, Marco Romero, CEO and founder of Positive Materials, Inc., Joe Lowry, President of Global Lithium LLC, and John Passalacqua, CEO of First Phosphate. So please join me in warmly welcoming them to the stage. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks very much to Fastmarkets as well for putting on this great conference. I'll just say, please jump in with questions throughout the panel. We'll come back to them at the end. And I'm just going to jump in to the panel straight away. If North America wants a competitive battery supply chain, what is the single biggest midstream bottleneck today? If you could just give a short, succinct answer. Trent, if you want to start.
I think it's connecting the nickel and the PCAM plant, so it's a dual answer.
Yeah.
But if you can co-locate that, we've got the other ends, and that, to me, is the bottleneck that we're facing.
Okay.
Short and sweet, PCAM.
Okay.
I'll just have to echo that. PCAM
Okay.
and CAM.
And CAM. Joe?
Ditto.
Ditto. Rene?
Hate to give the same answer, but yeah, there's a big missing section between CAM and the rest of the battery chain.
Okay, so probably not a surprise. So, Marco and Trent, I mean, everybody talks about mining and gigafactories. Why do you think that PCAM and CAM has been the hardest segment of the supply chain to establish in North America?
A lot of it has to do with health, safety, and environment. The fact that there's a cost to having high performance on those, and a bit of a misconception of what things really cost in North America. And we believe that things can be done very competitively in North America.
Okay. Trent?
Yeah, like the CAM and PCAM skill set is not native to North America. In Asia, so Japan, Korea, China, they excel at that. But the cost structures here are just so high, it's hard to bring those partners in. Moreover, I would say that PCAM needs to be close to sulfates that are supplying it. Mm-hmm. And so there is a bit of a connectivity issue. You can't build a PCAM plant in isolation, particularly of the nickel. Otherwise, the cost burden of transporting what is a very moisture-heavy product across the globe just kills the economics even further.
Okay. And Joe, from an industry perspective, are these challenges that we see with PCAM and CAM, are they unique to North America, or do you see them in other sort of developed markets? I mean, obviously the guys have said, China has not got the same problem, but elsewhere.
I certainly don't think they're unique to North America. If you take ex-China, I think that you go to any other region that's not China, you've still got at least the problems North America has. Mm-hmm. And maybe at least now we acknowledge that it is a problem. The solution hasn't been agreed upon, but at least North America's focus now, you hear more and more about it. This is the third missing midstream panel I've been on in 12 months, so.
Yeah. I presented this exact panel 2 years ago, and there has been a slight change in personnel, but I agree with you. So Marco, what's the biggest misconception that people have about the establishing of PCAM and CAM production outside China, do you think?
For a while, there were a number of PCAM plant developers that were positioning themselves in sites where they were automatically embedding high costs. What we've tried to do differently is to focus on the cost drivers, waste management, logistics, transportation, labor, and see if we can find a way to stack all those to achieve a competitive cost. And we believe we've got that in New Brunswick.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Question for Joe and Rene, maybe. Do you think building more lithium production capacity in North America naturally leads to more cathode production? Or do you think that these are fundamentally separate investment decisions?
Are you asking me?
Go ahead.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I know from at least the end of the supply chain that we're on, from a lithium production standpoint, there are actually major differences between the different flavors of cathode that are out there. So for years, we were being told that we live in a hydroxide world. It'll only be a hydroxide world because it's all high nickel. And now here we are in a world where we're chasing the battery cost across the chain. We're going after things like lithium iron phosphate or LMR cathode. And all of a sudden, a lot of these investments that were already made to make high CAM now have to be converted over at a pretty significant cost. And then on our end of the chain, you have to decide, are you going to make which chemical at what time? So all flavors of lithium aren't the same. So I don't know if that answers or...
Yeah, that's great. Joe, any perspective?
I think that, at least in the U.S. now, we've got Thacker going, you're going to have Smackover, and you got the build-out time. It's going to take 4 to 5 years before we're a reasonable producer of lithium chemicals. The CAM side could catch up easily if there was the will, because you can put that in place a lot faster, but you have to have the investment and you have to have the will to invest.
Yeah.
And I don't see that yet.
Yeah. John, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have enough projects that are out there that are well on their way. I think what we need to do is we need to start small, walk before you can run. I think our biggest missteps were earlier in prior, I guess, waves of the battery evolution here in the West, was we tried to run before we could walk. But I believe you got to start slow. You got to start out at your 500 tons, your 1,000 tons, your 2,000 tons, go to 5, go to 10, go to 20, go to 50, go to 200. So I think it's not about getting more raw materials. It's about being able to move them up to the upstream, like we're discussing today. And I think, frankly, and I've spoken about it on all the different panels that I've been on and in my presentation as well the other day, government's got to get tough, or we got to get tough, and we have to implement local content requirements. We have a number of players that are coming from outside of North America into our markets to develop end products, whether they be on nickel manganese or whether they be on LFP or other technologies. There's got to be local content requirements put into there. Okay, fine. You want to still import 80, 90% from China or wherever it is on the CAM, but you have to have 5, 10, 15, 20%, maybe even 3%, 1%, whatever it is, got to be made locally. And that kicks off that, walk before you can run supply chain, which is what we need in here to get going. Because we are smart, we have the resources, we have the abilities, we just have to kick it off. And as you know, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. The longer we stay at rest, the longer we will stay at rest. So let's get in motion.
Okay. So China dominates in LFP cathode materials, in fact, in most cathode materials. And Korean and Chinese companies are rapidly scaling in Morocco, Indonesia, and Korea. Question for Trent and John, really. What can North America realistically compete on, and what should it stop trying to compete on?
Stopping is easy. Stop the race to the bottom. Look, in our case, we started building, like a lot of people, right out of COVID, and paused the project in 2023. We almost went bankrupt. LG and GM, everybody else made it through, but they were bruised, right? And that was a terrible environment to build in. In our case, what saved us was an inbound, unsolicited call from the U.S. government, Department of Defense, Department of War, into a Canadian refinery saying, effectively, we know what you're doing, we want to help you. And so that signal prompted Canada and then Ontario to come in and lenders, and it got everything going. And so for me, the lesson that I take away from that, it harkens back to a lot of the war cycles. Roosevelt, 1 year before World War II, gave a famous radio address talking about how America must be the arsenal of democracy, right? We must outproduce our adversary if we want to win the war, and it worked. But you can't build that infrastructure when you need it. And we've had the signals, right? We've had the rare earth export restrictions, export quotas. We learned the same thing in Korea. America went to war and whoops, we're not ready. We got to hurry up. We're investing in titanium and aluminum then. To me, the arsenal of democracy now is the people in this room, right? It's critical minerals. And so what broke the cycle for us of a capitalist system where everybody behaves rationally is a government signal, where defense can't do everything, but their contribution gave a signal that this was a worthy investment, and it just got everything going.
Okay. John, any perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, with respect to Indonesia and Morocco, we've already seen recently in the press with Morocco, there was some issues with the European Union. The European Union is pretty upset now that, Morocco is being used as a gateway due to its free trade agreement with the European Union for all other countries, especially those that, are entities of concern, to be able to bring products into Europe. And we saw that with, I think it was rims on vehicles going into Germany from Morocco. I would say, the USA's got to get tough, and the countries in the Allied area have to get tough as well. Do we have a policy or do we not have a policy? And if we have a policy, is a policy be meant to be gotten around? And that's the question, right? So simply by signing a free trade agreement by a third-party country with the United States or Europe or any other countries in the West, does that now mean that foreign entities of concern can establish in those countries and then be able to almost get the same rights, into our markets? That's the question. So I think it's a real big question of government, and it's a question of how tough does government want to be? How tough is government about setting up these local supply chains? Government has all the ability to do it if they want. I'll give you an example. When we, in our mining area, right, we have indigenous communities that we have to take care of. And in order to have those mining rights to be able to continue, they say certain things like, you want to build a mine here? Well, we need 15% of all the contracts that occur at the mine site. And we understand that there might be a little bit of differences in price, but we're trying to build up our local business community here. We're trying to develop our youth. We need that. Can you give us that? And my answer is sure. I think it's very reasonable. So I think it's also very reasonable for us inside of North America to be able to say, look, you want to come into these markets, there's got to be local content requirements. And it's simply not good enough to say, I'm now going to go through a proxy country and do exactly what I was doing before, and oh, silly you. So government's got to get tough.
Okay, thanks very much. And Joe, sort of building up from that, what do you think is the next practical step that the North American industry needs to take to move from strategy into execution on the midstream?
Could you repeat that, the first part?
So what's the next practical step that the North American industry needs to take to move from strategy into execution?
Well, I think it's action instead of talk. I mean, I think that's a very simple answer to that question. And there's been all sorts of talk, but it's really about acting.
Okay. I think that's a very good answer. So Rene, I mean, you've successfully advanced one of the largest lithium projects in North America at Thacker Pass. What lessons can you pass on in terms of securing financing, customer support, which you think are most relevant to midstream developers?
If you're talking about midstream in general, you probably don't have the same type of permitting issues building a chemical facility in an industrial site as you do a mine on BLM land, for example. But some of the funding and financing questions are definitely very similar. You're trying to build a certain quanta of capability. You're trying to present a product to market, and you are trying to justify to those people that are investing in you that you can actually pay that debt back, for example. So there is a lot of difficulty sometimes in understanding what the value of the products are in the market That's an ongoing thing across the entire supply chain. And sometimes people aren't comparing the same things. So there are certain sectors of the entire industry that operate at a loss in certain sectors of the world. And when you're trying to compete against someone who is able to operate a loss for an extended period of time, you suffer a challenge trying to get funded.
Okay, and I guess that sort of feeds into my next question. So, you know, governments have supported the mining industry, they've supported downstream industries like EV battery manufacturing with, you know, specific advantages like tax credits and loan guarantees, procurement, faster permitting. What do you think that the midstream industry needs in terms of financial support, perhaps, that it's not getting today from governments? Trent, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, certainly offtake is helpful, although it have to be small. What I'm most interested in is the US-led discussions around border price adjustment mechanisms. Right, so MP Materials, I'm sure everyone in the room saw that deal, and that was a one-off. Right, we're not going to see that kind of economics again because the burden on the US taxpayer is too big. But if Western allied nations can agree to a floor price, right, a market clearing floor price that will insulate us from non-economic actors, then I think that provides the right kind of environment for us to build out our business case and to get a financeable product in place. I'll echo the comment around government action as well, right? There's too much talk. I'm a Canadian, but I will say allied nations need to keep up with the US, right? Less talk, less policy, less trade agreements and MOUs, and deploy the capital you're talking about, because that, again, that's the signal we need to get other financiers in this room to the table.
I mean, in terms of floor prices, possibly PCAM, how viable do you think that is for the CAM industry? Because it's kind of a margin industry.
It is. I'm going to defer to my colleague here on the PCAM.
I can't imagine it being viable, to be honest with you. We're talking about custom-made, bespoke projects that are made to very tight, specific specifications. They're not commodities that you can store in bulk. Simply put. The reality, though, is that there are things that can be done to incentivize investment, to support it, to protect it, especially in the early years. I like what John had to say about starting small. The industry has to start, the expertise has to build around these projects, the operating expertise. And then over time, I believe that, you know, it'll flow, it'll fit in, it'll finally create that missing link between the primary and recycled raw materials and the downstream, because right now it doesn't exist. There is no PCAM production in North America today. It's sorely needed.
Okay.
And I wouldn't suggest that, you know, we've got to be competitive, right? Our cobalt refinery, we're 9 months out. The OPEX is the big hurdle. We're not going to be as competitive as YU, but we're not going to be at the top of the cost curve. So I'll take that point. But provisions like 842 of the annual defense procurement, whatever the legislation is, now requires defense contractors to look beyond tier one suppliers and go up your supply chain, right? And we don't want any FIOC Chinese supplies within our supply chain. Right, so things like that, a little bit of enforcement, a little bit of accountability through our supply chain will help kind of raise the floor and allow Western producers to compete, again, at a market clearing price, at an economic price, not a below market price.
Okay, and John, your company recently received some major funding from the Canadian government, some support from the G7. So what do you, I mean, it's obviously great that you've received those things. What other things do you need to sort of develop?
Yeah, look, as a free market capitalist, we did receive funding from the government. We received $17 million from the Canadian government. That was non-refundable, that was non-dilutive. And that was to advance us through our feasibility study, them noting the need for phosphate and the need for development of the LFP battery supply chain in Canada and North America. And recently at the G7, under the Critical Minerals Resilience and Production Alliance, we were recognized as, you know, potentially solving that problem at an international level within the G7. We announced significant offtakes, definitive, bankable. We also announced support from credit agencies and other institutions in Italy and also in Denmark. That was important. Yes, the funding was important from the Canadian government. That's just to start with this one. But what was more important and what we should really focus on is the signal, right? The signal that gave to the markets, which then allowed us to raise additional capital and gets us the credibility which we deserve, we already have, but sometimes it needs to be there. So I think, we tend to think that, dollars equals help, but really the dollars equals kind of the power of moral suasion on behalf of the nation state. And when you bring that up to a G7 level, it's a power of moral suasion, but on an international level. We need more of that. So if we could do more of that, and not necessarily the dollars, that works too. But I think the dollars send the signal that the governments are there, the G7 is getting serious about it, they're serious about their supply chains, and they're looking to companies that can provide the solutions. Now, at the G7 level, it wasn't the G7 that basically asked the nation states to, of Denmark and of Italy to provide the guarantees and the LOIs. There was also a private company in Italy, engineering group, quoted on the Milan Bourse, $5 billion market cap Mare Group, that initiated the process. But because it was under the G7 umbrella and we had been asked to put together the supply chain, all the entities of the Italian state and of Denmark and the off-takers came together much quicker, right? And that was through the power of moral suasion. So what would have taken us maybe 18 to 24 months to put together was put together within 3 to 6 months. So that's the power. I think that's the power, the message that it signals. And it hasn't yet happened, but it started to happen. That's going to signal the capital. But we have to signal the right capital. Unfortunately, and I don't want to make a statement about it, but there's a lot of not so friendly capital out there available to companies on this panel and other companies in the critical mineral space. But I think as the governments start to endorse these, and as the capital providers see that there's endorsement at the nation state level and at levels like the G7, I don't think they would dare to pull off the toxic tricks that they do or try to within the capital structures of these companies. So it starts to create sort of a level hand-holding hand playing field, and I hope that will start to attract more constructive and amicable capital. Certainly has for us.
Okay, and Rene, I mean, you notably managed to get a significant amount of funding out of the US government. Can you just talk through what you needed to do in order to attract that funding and lessons that other companies might be able to learn from what you had to do?
Yeah, definitely. What we actually have is a loan from the US government. It's not a grant. So we had to go through the full due diligence process over a multi-year period. It took roughly 28 months for them to go through every bit of our technical, permitting, market, everything to understand it like you would for a regular loan, right? This was not, even though it seemed to happen fairly quickly because it's a long quiet period and then suddenly there's news, it was actually a long involved process. Once we had conditional approval, we then had to go through and complete specific terms and conditions in order to finalize that loan and begin first draw. That first draw actually happened early in the current administration. It was about a $435 million draw. We've since done 2 or 3 more since then. And even during this phase of the loan, we have continuous monthly contact with the Department of Energy just to make sure that we're on the glide path that we showed them for both spending as well as product value. So it is an intense process, but also as a taxpayer, one that I was kind of glad to see happen because their focus is on making sure we can actually pay that back.
Mm-hmm. And when you sort of talk about due diligence, I mean, that includes like a full demonstration plant and everything for the asset and...
There was definitely a big part with the demonstration plant. We had built a technical center in Reno. It was about 30,000 square feet. It allowed us to run the entire flow sheet under one roof, including all the recycle streams, which was something we needed anyway. But it allowed people to actually see the flow sheet operate in one place and really understand that, there's no black magic in this. It's all engineering and commercial know-how. So that was very helpful. It did help to communicate the technical aspects of things more clearly to people, which was helpful. But more than that, it included things like our partnership with General Motors, the specific terms of the agreement with them in order to guarantee, again, that this could turn into revenue that would pay that debt back. So it was an intense process, but again, it was worth it.
Okay, thanks very much. And Joe, I mean, as a consultant, somebody who's obviously involved with the industry at the grassroots level, but also is looking at the industry top down, what do you think in terms of what sort of specific support the industry needs?
Yeah, I just think that what Lithium Americas went through was too much.
Yeah.
Because I think it was as bad as any due diligence. That it was probably worse. I mean, I think that's fair to say. And I think if you want to build something and you're talking about speed, you can't have a slow, bloated process. And I'm not for just throwing money, for the shovel-ready projects of 20 years ago that didn't turn out so well. But there's got to be a happy medium where things are expedited. But this had kind of the worst of both worlds in terms of the due diligence, but slow due diligence doers. Yeah. And maybe my friend who actually works for LAC cannot say that, but I am happy to throw that out there.
Okay, that's great. And I mean, often, when we talk about the midstream, we're talking about the ternary supply chain, but obviously globally, LFP is continuing to gain market share. Within the supply chain, phosphate rarely gets the same strategic attention as maybe lithium, nickel, graphite. So do you think North America is overlooking a critical vulnerability in the supply chain? And maybe I'll give that one to John.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Matt. I think in general, the mistake that we're making is, like it came out on one of the panels yesterday as well, we're focusing on critical mineral stockpiles. So let's think of stockpiles, pile 1, pile 2, pile 3, pile 4, pile 5, and rain coming down on them, all of them getting diluted back into the environment. What I'm trying to say by that is that, what are critical minerals without an end product, right? So the reason that something like phosphate might get a little bit less attention, now it's starting to get a lot more attention, is because we're starting to realize that, we can have lithium, and lithium is great, but lithium needs to be part of something else. It needs to be a part of CAM, and for CAM, you need to bind lithium with nickel, manganese, cobalt, or you need to bind it with lithium, iron, and phosphate, right? So, the discussion was around ternary batteries over the last few years. So nickel, manganese, and cobalt were really understood together with lithium to get to that end result. But now that LFP has gained so much traction, just the understanding is starting to come along. Okay, well now it's lithium, iron, and phosphate that go into the LFP battery. So phosphate has not been focused on, but what an opportunity for a company like mine, right? We've basically gone into the highest purity igneous phosphate in the world in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, Quebec, and we're able to take that precious rock and convert it at a rate of about 91.1% into purified phosphoric acid, which is the holy grail to be able to get to LFP battery. We started early. We started when lithium iron phosphate was 30-40% of global markets. Now it's almost double that, if not more. So, big opportunities coming up in phosphate. Iron as well. Iron powder is out there. Iron powder is available, but in the purity formats that are needed for LFP, it starts to get a little bit difficult. So we've already, put together an agreement with GK and Hoganus of Tennessee. That's the world's largest atomizer of iron powder. So we're able to get to all three, lithium, iron, and phosphate, to get into that midstream, which I guess is what, the focus of this panel is about. So we really, really need to get beyond the critical minerals. We really need to get into the midstream. And really, we need to get to the end products, right? Because what is lithium, what is phosphate, what is nickel, what is anything, unless it gets into a battery or it gets into a solar panel, or it gets into any other form of electrified product. So we really start to need to think about critical midstream, right, and critical end stream as well, end products.
Okay, thanks very much. And Trent, I mean, you alluded earlier to the fact that you had a slightly thorny period. What lessons have you learned from those experiences that could make the next generation of projects more competitive, do you think?
Simplistically, if I could wind back the clock, I'd probably stay private for longer, but not able to do that. I think you got to follow the government money. So our cobalt refiner will be operating towards the end of Q1 next year, and now we've been working on nickel, and so we're looking to the U.S. Unfortunately, or fortunately, right? That's the supply chain. There's $200 billion of capital sitting under the National Security Council across 5 agencies, with Department of War controlling about 55% of that. Huge amounts of capital. And the message you get is, give me an Excel spreadsheet and a term sheet, Excel document, instead of a PowerPoint, right? They got hundreds of PowerPoints. And so we kind of hurt ourselves. We're a big industry, and a lot of the ideas that are being brought to government are not ready, right? So we need the support of the engineering firms in the room to help move things forward faster. We need to make sure we go in there ready, and yet the money is there now, and maybe we're not ready. So you're trying to shoehorn a project that maybe hasn't had all the work done in front of government. I did that with nickel. I went in with an idea, and we're having discussions. Now I got to hurry up on the engineering. But if you can get that relationship with government and build that trust and credibility, I think you got to start there.
Okay, excellent. And Marco, would you say we are underestimating, or maybe investors or the industry is underestimating how difficult cathode and PCAM production is compared to mining?
It is indeed high technology manufacturing. There's very narrow parameters that you need to work within to succeed. It's easier said than done. There's no doubt about it. And in our case, we did not want to try to invent a new way. We went to partner with a successful, capable producer of these products, and we're able to combine our forces. And there's been a lot of learning along the way as to how much is actually in the know-how, in the operations. The recipes, the formulas, the chemistry is one thing, but managing that process with very narrow, tight parameters is a challenge indeed. It's easier said than done.
Okay. We're coming to the end. Please ask questions. We've got one question on the screen. If there's anyone else who's got questions, please flag them. I'll maybe just ask you all, if we sit here 10 years from now, what would success look like for North America's midstream? Maybe just start with Rene.
That's a good question. I think, at least in the case of China, there is a lot of government support, like some of the other panelists have talked about. So that's allowed them, to build ahead on the curve and be prepared for certain changes in the industry that things have come forward. Having said that, if you're talking about North America, we have a very different business model, honestly. And with a high-tech, tight, controlled parameters business, you have to get to a certain level of scale in order to dilute your fixed costs out to a certain level. So I think it would take both the ability to have that supply on a stable basis of raw materials in. It would take stable demand on the other side in order to make those significant investments and to know enough to build the larger facilities at some point. But
excellent. Joe?
I think success would be if our lithium projects go forward, say, in the 5 to 7 years, and we have a significant lithium production, that we have an equal amount of midstream demand to match up with that. And I won't talk about PCAM, I'll just say, having run a cathode joint venture long ago, I don't think cathode's as hard as a lithium project. That's just my personal opinion. I think it's a very low margin business that American companies didn't want to participate in because of the returns. And I think that's gonna have to be addressed. Mm-hmm. And if you look at what China did, China subsidized every bit of that supply chain all the way down the line for the last 25 years. So it isn't a question of free markets for, it was required by China. It's going to be required by us, whether people like it or not.
Okay, John?
Yeah, look, I don't think government has to necessarily put money out there. I think government has to, put in place the proper local content requirements. If you want to come into North America, if you want to sell into North America, part of your production has to be made in North America. And if part of your production has to be made in North America, that means that every critical input in that battery, there has to be a portion that's made in North America. Start small, walk before you can run, use the power of moral suasion, and get these supply chains built small, and then they will grow on their own. That's my opinion.
Marco?
Look, we've got a shot right now at putting together a very valuable supply chain that will enable the use of our local raw materials and keep us, sovereign and autonomous. One of the areas that I would love to see emphasis on is building up labor force. What we've learned is that, like I said, this is not an easy product to make. Training people to make it well and do it consistently, day in, day out, is one of our hills to climb here on this one. And it's one that we focused on very early. We expect to be training people early on in Japan and bring Japanese here to train in Canada as well. And it's one area the government can easily help with.
Okay, that's great. A little bit of time for questions. There's a really good one to start off with. With standalone CAM suppliers failing to thrive in China, is vertical integration an absolute prerequisite for US battery developers, or is there still a world where a standalone merchant CAM model can succeed? Do you want to take that one, Marco?
Yeah, the vertical integration is essential, but it doesn't need to be corporate vertical integration. It's more about collaboration. The amount of work that needs to be done to, for example, come up with a single product that meets a targeted spec, whether it's driven by energy density, power, cycle life, safety, you name it, chargeability. In our case, is one that's done through iteration and a lot of collaborative work. So the standalone model can work, I believe, but not in isolation. It needs to be working closely with the other elements, both upstream and downstream.
Okay. Request for government support. So lobbying. Do you want to take that one, Trent?
Yeah, I guess I've kind of answered it. Yeah, OEMs are definitely lobbying. The tone hasn't changed, it's gotten better. Like the tailwinds are there. They want winners, they want projects, they want to fund. So I feel good. To Joe's point earlier, DOE and EXIM have rightfully been criticized as being too slow. There's a big push to do that better. DFC has done some amazing work in the Congo, right, securing cobalt units. So there were a lot of pieces. There's a lot of pressure to deploy or at least commit as much of that capital as you can before the midterms. So I think things are going the right way. Yeah, we wish EV adoption was stronger and faster, but I think the policy tools are unabated.
Okay, thanks very much. Joe, do you want to take the humanoid robots question?
I think the
nice hospital pass.
humanoid robots aren't going to be. There are going to be a lot of them, but they're not lithium enough intense to compare with what has to be done for storage and what has to be done for EVs. So I think it's a reasonable question, but the answer is no.
Okay, great. Well, we are informed that we are over time. So I'm going to thank all of the panelists very much for their opinions. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, I think everybody's around a little bit later. So thanks very much indeed.
Good. Thank you.